Keir Starmer in trouble again, this time about his poor judgment over appointing Peter Mandelson as a UK ambassador to America. Is this the end of him, or will he stagger on to another crisis? Welcome to Lembit Öpik Live.
This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you!
Boring. Boring. Boring.
Okay, get it work. Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that. That's exactly what you're doing. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
I call again for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the sausages, the hostages.
Welcome once again to Lembit Öpik Live here on Unprecedented TV, where we find the facts, kill the spin, and tell it like it is as best we can. Thanks very much indeed. If you've already subscribed to our YouTube channel, that's at Unprecedented TV. Easy to find. Costs nothing, takes you 30 seconds, and you'll find hundreds of shows there to enjoy as well. Today I want to ask this question: what's going to happen to Keir Starmer, given that the revelations we already have about his judgment over appointing Peter Mandelson as the UK ambassador to America seems to have been flawed? There have been lots of headlines. Here's one of them, in fact. Mandelson papers reveal Keir Starmer ignored warnings of appears links to Epstein. Now, that's an interesting one because basically the PM was warned about the ambassador's link to Epstein and told him he could cause reputational damage, no less. But he carried on regardless. This is the first of the really big revelations that we've now had about Keir Starmer's decision to appoint Peter Mandelson. But what it tells us is he was warned that this guy might not be the best choice. Now, I'm not saying that the fact that he could cause reputational damage meant that he, under no circumstances, should be appointed. But you've got to be a little bit suspicious when many people all over Parliament and in politics had said that Peter Mandelson wouldn't be an appropriate choice. I worked with Peter Mandelson many years ago. He was the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. That was my main involvement with him. And I have to say, the man was not honest. He basically lied and he caused trouble. Peter Mandelson essentially betrayed me and a man called David Trimble, very important to the peace process, and thought he could get away with it. But we compared notes and we discovered what had happened. So anyone who was around in politics 20 years ago would have pointed out to Keir Starmer, surely, that this man could be a big risk. Once again, maybe that's not enough of a reason to pass him over for this position. Perhaps he had some magic quality that would make him really popular in America. But how about this? A weirdly rushed appointment and other key takeaways from the Mandelson files. It turns out that the appointment was done in a rather unconventional way. It seems that rather than going through the usual rather complicated checks and balances, he was rushed into the appointment because Keir Starmer had some view that this great politician, despite all of his record, all of his history, would convert a relationship and America into something special. Of course, that didn't really happen. It turned out Keir Starmer had ignored the fact that Peter Mandelson had said, I think of Donald Trump, that he was a danger actually to the world and so forth. But so he carried on and he put the person in anyway. Now, that's not the only thing. There's other story. There's another story. Starmer allies turn against Blair over Iran critique. Blair criticized Starmer's stance on Iran for Team Starmer. That's not necessarily a bad thing. So there's another stress here, another issue, if you like, but hold the front page. That isn't the whole story because Tony Blair applied his genius to appointing Peter Mandelson, who was actually in trouble more than once whenever he was in those Blair New Labour years. So a previous prime minister had also had problems with Peter Mandelson. Now, there's a sideshow which is very important sideshow, but sideshow nonetheless, about what Blair seems to think, Tony Blair, the warmonger who took us to what many think of as an illegal war in Iraq, what he says and what Keir Starmer says. And they might be all friendly and happy with each other there, but actually they've both got a rather dodgy war history, and I would include Ukraine in that. I just don't think there's any way we should be involved in Ukraine, but that's for another time. So now we've got Keir Starmer repeating the mistakes of his predecessors, and you could throw Gordon Brown in there as well. He was formerly Prime Minister, and once again had various problems with the Mandelson Affair. And so now we get to a situation where these papers, the first set of papers has been published, and we discover that Keir Starmer ignored advice saying that there could be reputational damage if he employed Peter Mandelson as the UK ambassador, and it was going against various protocols. Normally, the ambassador from Britain to America is a career ambassador, a career civil servant, not some person who comes in as a razzmatazz politician, if you can even think of Peter Mandelson as that. So he also ignored that point, and as a result, we ended up with the mess that Peter Mandelson has caused for Keir Starmer. And on it goes. Iranians living in the UK tell Starmer that war will only strengthen Tehran regime. All of this other stuff that should be taking Keir Starmer's attention doesn't get the attention because he's too busy trying to defend himself about what Peter Mandelson did. And look at the subtext here. Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, among more than 100 signatories to letter urging Prime Minister not to get drawn further into the Iran conflict. Now, you might say, well, that's just not relevant. It is relevant because this is all about judgment. It's all about the professional judgment of the Prime Minister. Keir Starmer could easily ignore this. Some would say he already has, because there are clearly offensive missions going from Britain to Iran. Apparently, they're defensive missions. I don't really understand how bombing another country is a defensive act, but okay. The fact is, we're already involved. We're already actively participating, at least by default, by letting America use the air bases. And he flip-flops. So this is relevant because once again, the whole thing is about the judgment of Keir Starmer. And I put it to you, my first of 3 points today, that once again, we see Starmer's poor judgment bringing him down and bringing the country down. Because I don't actually think having Peter Mandelson as our UK ambassador to America ever was a good look. So that's the first thing. The second thing, then, is all the other stuff that's only just beginning to come out. I mean, for example, look at the money. There it is. Politics later, Starmer warned Mandelson was a reputational risk. That means Starmer was warned that Mandelson was a reputational risk. I realise it's badly written there. Files show ex-ambassador wanted over £500,000 of severance. And the government's published internal documents related to Keir Starmer's decision to appoint Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the US. Now, this is another example of something that just doesn't sit comfortably whenever you think about Keir Starmer. He had a man who he fired who then asked for something like £500,000 in severance, something like that figure, or close to it. He actually got 77,000. It's still a fairly tidy packet. But once again, you see Peter Mandelson proving something he probably never thought would be out in the public domain, that he just wanted to sting the taxpayer for as much money as he possibly could. Once again, that is on Starmer, because Starmer's the person who appointed him. Put all this together, and what you're seeing is a rather ugly situation where this man was absolutely obsessed with the idea of lining his own pocket, hanging around with a child abuser, convicted child abuser, that's Jeffrey Epstein, and according to Starmer himself, lying his way into the job. So even by Starmer's own assessment, Mandelson was a bad call. And then you got this £500,000 attempt to rinse the public when he was booted out for misbehavior. Can you see what's going on here? It begins to look pretty bad on the Prime Minister. Now, let's go further into this, if we can. And the further into this, is the fact that Mandelson and Starmer ended up really closely connected. This picture, I'm sure, was staged. When you watch the repeated video of those two walking along, it's quite clear that they were more or less told to start at the other end and walk forward looking friendly. So every time you see these pictures, it reminds us of Starmer's bad decision-making. Now, this is the second point. He's apologized, but he hasn't changed his ways because he's still making the judgments. Recall his flip-flopping that I just said about Iran. And who knows what else comes out of these papers. And I'll come to that in a minute. Let's remember, of course, Mandelson was one of those people who goes to the World Economic Forum to spout off. And now I'm not too keen on the World Economic Forum. I think it's a control mechanism used by very wealthy and powerful people around the world to control the rest of us. But there he is, pontificating to his pals over in Davos or wherever it is that they meet. Now, this leads me to my third point. It's likely, very likely, that there'll be further embarrassment coming out of all this for Starmer. And here's one of them. Starmer said ministers can go against wishes of Welsh and Scottish governments in a leaked memo. Well, that's really awkward because he's basically telling his own Labour ministers in London they can ignore the devolution, the devolutionary parliaments or assemblies or senates, if you want, in Wales and Scotland. Now, that's going to pretty much annoy a lot of Labour politicians in Wales and Scotland who, let's be honest, are already really worried for their jobs because Starmer is catastrophically unpopular around the country. Labour absolutely crashed and burned in a by-election in a place called Caerphilly in Wales, where they had a safe seat and they couldn't even come close. They didn't even come second in that. And then, of course, you may have seen the Gorton and Denton by-election, something we covered here on Unprecedented TV, where they came third again. So you've now got this other tale of embarrassing stories, which are almost certain to come out again and again and again as the other papers are revealed. His only hope is to pray, really. Of course, he wouldn't pray because he's an atheist, but cross his fingers he can do that as an atheist and somehow wish that there won't be any more embarrassing revelations in the Mandelson files. But of course there will be. They're bound to be. His only hope then is that somehow he manages to talk people out of publishing them. But I'm not sure he can do that because already Starmer is desperately damaged goods. So you've got all of this. There's a perfect storm of embarrassment coming towards Starmer, mainly caused by himself, by his bad judgment, and the bad judgments keep on coming. So what happens next, my friends? Well, the files will keep getting published, and lots of people will be going through the thousands and thousands of pages, a little bit like the Epstein files, as we discover every little thing that Starmer cannot cover up in those files. Can Starmer survive? Yes, I think so. I don't think this will bring him down unless there's something so bad in there that his position is totally untenable. And Kemi Badenoch, at time of broadcasting, has already said that Starmer should resign, but she would say that, wouldn't she? She's leader of the opposition, the Conservative Party. I think he can stagger on. He can survive this. Why? Because none of the other leadership candidates who are salivating at the idea of a leadership election this year in Labour will want to take the rap for the local government elections. Those are happening in the first week of May this year. So a couple of months from now. They are just going to sit on their hands and wait to take the rap when the party could lose literally thousands of seats. Quite likely, in fact, that they will lose. They'll certainly lose hundreds, but it could be thousands of seats. Probably largely to the benefit of Reform UK, but we'll see about that. We'll see what happens. And all the while, he has this huge big problem called a war. That could be anywhere. That could just as easily be in Ukraine as it could be in Iran. But the truth is, at times of national defense and a time when people are jumpy, we need a steady hand. I think they will wait until after the local elections and then say, "Oi, Starmer, you're out." So he probably won't be brought down by the current problems that he's facing. In fact, he's unlikely to be brought down by it because, quite simply, it's in no one's interests to take over just before an inevitably catastrophic local government election in May. So Starmer, I'm happy or sad to tell you, will be the Prime Minister for at least another couple of months. After that, I just don't see how he can make it. And when you're looking at a war situation like this, it's tremendously disturbing, because how do we know that he won't drag us in by accident? Now, I don't tend to personalize politics very much. I don't like it. I think it's a bit distasteful. But when you look at the way that Starmer is so terrified of his own position that he blocked the man on the left in this picture, Andy Burnham, from even standing in a by-election he could have won, you realize the guy's terrified of losing his role. I don't think his relationship with Donald Trump's any great shakes. In fact, I would say that the so-called special relationship has never been worse than it is now. I think there's a huge mess now, not least because Peter Mandelson didn't do his job properly, as far as I can tell. So I conclude with this thought. Peter Mandelson has done no favours whatever to the status of the Labour Party, to his own credibility, or indeed to that of Keir Starmer. But the real culprit here isn't Peter Mandelson. We could have told him. We could have told Starmer that Mandelson was not going to be the best choice for UK ambassador to America. The problem here is that we've got a prime minister who guesses answers and often guesses wrong. We're really looking at somebody who has persistently done U-turns after saying that the Tories were no good, the Conservative government was no good because of all this U-turns. We've seen him make terrible judgments again and again and again, not least by appointing Mandelson to America and ignoring advice, which any sensible person would at least be able to justify in terms of why they ignored the advice. Mandelson has caused huge embarrassment, but Starmer has apologized for the wrong thing. What he should apologize for is his judgment. He should say, if he wants to stay in the job, I am going to get better advisors, and heads will roll in Downing Street if he does that. But he's not going to do that, I don't think. He's just going to try and stumble on with his own team, perhaps because he already knows the game's up for him. I would only point you to that earlier picture, that tragedy of a war, and it's a war which it's probably unclear where it's going in Iran, and the fact that Tony Blair also found himself in a war situation in the Middle East, and that has forever marked his time, his reputation as Prime Minister. And who was there on both occasions? Peter Mandelson, who's known as the Prince of Darkness at the time. Maybe that's an insult to darkness, as far as I'm concerned. If you keep doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different outcome, that is indeed the definition of madness. But I don't think that Keir Starmer's mad. I just think he's badly advised by himself. He takes his own advice, and it's usually wrong. Some of this is darkly amusing. See what I did there? But much of it is just a huge pain in terms of our international reputation and our faith in the current Labour government to make the right decisions. We could be dragged into a war which has no real escape plan. The way that America left Afghanistan was in crisis. The way that the Iraq situation was resolved was through hundreds of thousands, or some would say even 1.5 million deaths, and pretty much forced resignation for Blair himself. Starmer's got these problems, and he's making the classic mistake. He's trying to fight on more than one front, literally in Ukraine and also in Iran, but metaphorically too, inside his party and outside to the country. I cannot see how Starmer can survive even to June, unless he's admitted he's leaving and then he's just a caretaker for a short while. It's tragic that local politics might be the only reason that we actually get the solution that we're looking for here. But at the same time, it might be doing us a favor if a horrendous failure by Labour means that Starmer needs to move on. But then I leave you with this sobering thought. Who is going to take over? Angela Rayner could be the favourite. That'll be the gift that keeps on giving, but not in a good way. I don't think the country is very well served by our politicians, but the worst thing of all is that we haven't got the power to change it. Only Labour can do that. And until Labour change their leader to somebody good, our government is going to be bad, bad, bad. I'm Lembit Öpik. Please subscribe and like to @Unprecedented TV on YouTube, and tell your friends as well. We tried to tell the facts, and as you can see, my opinions too. And since they're all in the archive, you can find out if I'm right or wrong. Thanks to the team. More than anything, thanks to you for watching. Have a good day.
Immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The return of the sausages.